Okay, so we have already understood like how to attach a volume to a Docker container so that we can preserve the data, right? Now let's do one more thing. Like we had executed this command to start the container with a volume attached. I'll just show you that, and then we are going to try another command now. So this is what we had done. This one. Here we mention the name of a volume, and this is where we mention the directory which we want to mount, right? So another way of doing this is we can create a volume actually. So I would say docker create volume, and then I can mention the name. So I would say name would be Nexus -data. We can keep any name though. So first I am creating a volume, and then I can attach that created volume, right? And now let me just see docker volume ls Nexus. Okay, just a second, let me just see the command one more time. I have mentioned it, like just a second, docker volume create -- name. Okay, I just missed that. Docker volume create, it should. Correct, this should be the command, docker volume create and then name of the volume. So the volume, now we can see docker volume ls, and we can create a volume is created. We can see it here. Now what we can do is we can start now the container with this volume attached to it, right? Similarly, the way we were doing it previously, like this command. So Nexus -data is the name of the volume which I just created. So I have created the volume, so that name I am mentioning here, and then I am mentioning the path of the directory from the container which I want to mount, and these are we are already familiar with, right? So let me just mention 8084, then the name of the container, and then let's start the container. So I'll say docker container ps. Yeah, Nexus container we are starting now. We have another container Jenkins one which is in the stopped state. So if we want, we can start it, docker container start, name, ID of the container, right? So docker container ps. So both the containers are running now. Now let's docker container logs and the name of the container, which is Nexus. Nexus is the name of the container.
Pranatay, did you rejoin now?
It looks like I was disconnected for a few seconds, maybe because of the power failure. I didn't realize that, but yeah, I'm sharing the screen now.
Okay, yeah, because for last 5 minutes we were not able to hear you.
Okay, no, never mind. It has already been recorded, so no problem. Yeah, so I've just executed the Nexus container. So Nexus is getting executed and
Can you give a gist of what was done till now? I'm not able to follow it.
yeah, okay. So actually what I did is like I created a volume using this command, this docker volume create and the name of the volume, and then I executed a Nexus container. So this command we are already familiar with of running a container, but previously when we were executing it, this volume was not created. I mean, when you run this docker run command, so if the volume doesn't exist, so this command itself creates the volume and then it attaches that volume to your container. But right now what we did is we first created the volume and then we are attaching that created volume to our container by mentioning that name here. That's what is the only difference, nothing else.
Okay, so when I tried doing the same, it's telling me that error during connect. This error may indicate that Docker daemon is not running.
No, maybe, okay, I think you are not having your Docker desktop running.
Okay, how can I start running?
So just go to the start menu and say Docker desktop.
Okay.
So please make sure that the people who are using Windows system, make sure that you are always, whenever you will restart your system, you will start the Docker, so that Docker engine, it should be up and running. Then only you would be able to fire the command. That is one. Another is the command should be this one, docker volume create -- name and name of the volume.
All right. Okay.
Right, so my Nexus is up and running. Now what I can do is, let's go to the Chrome, localhost 8084, okay, and then it is asking us to put a password. So what we can do is we can enter into the container. We have already seen this docker exec -it nexus sh, and then we can get our password from this location. And this is the password. Admin is the username and this is the password. I am signing in. So I'll say next. I will enter a new password, admin123. Finish. Right? Now let's create a repository. A Docker hosted repository, let's say DevOps patch, and we have to check mark this, create an HTTP connector. Okay, and this connector we have to check in, and this we had not done previously when we had set up a Nexus inside the container and we were trying to actually push a Docker image to our Nexus repository, and then it was giving us the error 404. So to get rid of that error, what we need to do is we need to set up a HTTP connector. We need to set up a different port. Basically the port 8084 is basically a port of our repository manager. Okay, but when you are actually referring to the Docker repository for pushing your images to, or let's say logging into that repository, you cannot access it with this port 8084 because this is a Nexus repository manager's port. It's not Nexus repository's port. So we have to configure a Nexus repository port. You can mention any port. 8085 I'll mention. Okay, and I'll just scroll down. So no changes here. So these configurations we have already discussed about. Now let's create a repository. Now what we need to do is, I'll tell you, like we have configured one port 8084. So let's understand this and then I will do few more changes. But before I do that, let's understand few things here. Now the thing is, we have a container. See, we have a container. Inside the container we have our Nexus repository manager running. Nexus repo manager. This is running on port 8081. This port we have published and forwarded to 8081. Right? We are already aware of this publishing and forwarding. This is what I am talking about. See this one. So this 8081 port we have already forwarded to 8084. So using 8084 we are now accessing our Nexus manager. That is point number 1. But as I said that for Docker we cannot use this port like Docker, let's say login http:/localhost or localhost 8084. This we cannot do because 8084 is the port where our Nexus manager is getting executed. What this Docker command requires is a port where our repository can be accessed. Okay, so I just configured, while configuring this repository, I just configured HTTP connector port, this one 8085. So the meaning is that this 8085 port can be used to access my Docker repository. So there are two things, please understand. 8084 is the port to access our this Sonatype Nexus repository manager, and 8085 is the port to access our Docker registry or Docker repository. Okay, so one more port we are going to use, and that port we need to expose also. Okay, so currently we have exposed only 8081 port where our Nexus manager works. We have published it to 8084. So we are going to configure 8085 as our Docker registry or repository port. That also we need to expose. Then only we would be able to access a Docker repository or a Docker registry created inside the container. So what I'll do now is, let me just stop and delete this container. Docker container ps, Docker container stop Nexus. I'm stopping the container. I'm removing it. Let me remove it. Docker container prune. Okay, and one more point we are going to do now. In this command we are going to expose one more port, 8084:8081. This is one. Another is 8085:8085. That is the port of my Docker repository, that HTTP connector port 8085. I want to expose it to 8085 of my Docker host. I can choose any ports though, but as I have already decided to create a repository HTTP connector at 8085, I have decided that this particular port I want to forward it to 8085 again. I can decide any port, by the way. Let's run. Just a minute. Okay, just a second, I got it. Actually 8085. Okay, it has started. Docker container ps, and we have got 2 ports forwarded. So how to forward or publish multiple ports? You have to provide -p 2 times. -p, first -p, that is publish port, is publishing the internal 8081 port onto external 8084. Second -p is publishing the internal 8085 port to the Docker hosts 8085. So we have got now 2 ports published. You can say Docker container ps, and here also you can see this. We have got 2 ports forwarded, 8085 and 8084. Right, now let's Docker container exec. Let's go inside and get the password. I am now again going to get the password. Docker container, Docker exec -it, and then name of the container sh. Let's do cat /etc. Okay, let me do, just a minute, let's retry and access the Nexus. Okay, correct. Now let me come out Docker container ps. Now I have my Nexus up and running, right? So let me Docker exec -it Nexus sh ls-lrt, and yeah, I have got these things, so that's fine. Now let's come out. Now I have got my repository created. Just a second. Yeah, I have got the repository here, and now what I'll do is Docker login localhost :8085. Username is admin, password is admin123, and we can see that login is succeeded. We were getting the error here, guys. Please understand. Previously when we were doing this, let's understand again what we did. Okay, just to avoid the confusion, what was the case and what was the problem and what is the solution. Let's understand it again. Let me start from the beginning again. I'm just repeating this because I really want you guys to understand what we did, what was the problem we were facing, and what is the solution we have now. Let's understand. Docker container ps. Let me delete the container Nexus. Stop Nexus. I'm stopping the container. Container is stopped. Room Y. Okay, let's run a container. Previously we were running a container like this: 8084 and we were not publishing this another port. Okay, let's understand. So I'm running the container is started, docker container ps, docker container ps. So our container is up. Let's docker container logs Nexus. Let it start. Okay, let's retry. It's not yet started. Let it start, and then I'll show you what was the problem we were facing. Yeah, let it start. It has not yet started. Yeah, now the Sonatype server started. Now we are inside the repository. We had, by the way, created a repository that day, a Docker repository. So let me create one, or let me modify this one itself. So when we had created a Docker repository initially, we had not configured this HTTP connector. Okay, so we had configured the repository like this. So there was no HTTP or HTTPS connector configured. So allow anonymous Docker pull. Anonymous means what? Would you like anyone to pull your Docker images without providing the authentication? Let's say you have the Docker images pushed here, and now from your team the people are using the Docker images from here and doing their stuff. Now when they will pull the Docker images from this repository, do you want them to provide the their credentials, and do you want to authenticate them that whether they should be allowed to pull or not? Okay, now when you check mark this allow anonymous Docker pull, meaning that if you check mark this, then you don't require any authentication to pull the images. Please understand, pull is just downloading, and push is creating a new Docker image onto the Docker registry. Now pulling, usually a pulling can be allowed using anonymous access, means no need of any kind of authentication, because there is no harm in pulling the image. If at all you don't think that pulling the Docker image, you want it to be open for anyone in your organization, that he should be able to pull, just that he should not be able to push. So for pushing you want the authentication to be done, but for pulling or downloading you don't need any authentication. Then you can check mark this allow anonymous Docker pull. Then storage is fine, the default storage. This deployment policy we had discussed about this when we had created a Maven repository for our API jar file, right? And cleanup policy also we had discussed. So those things we have already discussed, but the thing is we had not configured any HTTP connector. So what we were getting an error is, let me show you that error, what was the problem. So we were actually trying to log in to our repository using this docker login localhost :8084. This is what we were trying to do. Okay, username admin 123, and this is what the error we were getting, 404. The problem is that when we try to access localhost 8084. So this 8084 is not the port on which our Docker repository is available. This 8084 is the port for our Nexus repository manager and not a repository. So now what we did is we configured a port for our repository 8085. So this is the port using which we can access our repository. Please understand, accessing a Nexus manager is different thing than accessing a Docker repository. So for Docker repository we have configured 8085 as a port. So we cannot access a Docker repository on 8084 because this is the port of our Nexus manager. So we configured this 8085, and now our Docker repository is available to be connected on 8085 port, but inside the container. We wanted to access it from outside, so we have to publish the port, obviously, the way we did it for accessing our manager, right? So for accessing a manager on 8081, basically our manager runs on 8081 inside the container. So we published it, or we forwarded that port to 8084. Similarly, that 8085 port of our repository, we need to forward it to some port so that we can access it from outside. Okay, that's what I did actually. Let me stop the container. Docker container stop Nexus. Let's stop and prune it. I have pruned the container. So container is gone now. Let's run the command again. -d -p and -p again to forward my Docker repositories port. So this is the internal port 8085 which I had configured here as a HTTP connector, so which I want to forward it to my Docker hosts 8085. Now let's run it. Just a minute. --name. Yes. So I have started a new container. Docker container ps. So now we can see that there are two ports. 8084 is the port on which I can access my repository manager, and 8085 is the port I use to access my Docker repository. There are two different things. Let's wait until our Nexus starts. I'm just checking if the Nexus server is up and running or not. So let it start and then we will access it. Yeah, let it start. It's not yet started. It is starting. It takes a bit of time, guys, to start the Nexus server. Let's wait. Yeah, it is up now. And now even if I am deleting the container, still my repository and everything is still there. It's not missed because of that volume mount. See, now my repository is still there. The configuration which I had done is still there. Why it is so? Because we had mounted. See here, because of this mount, Nexus data. this information when I had configured all these things for the first time. So this information has been stored inside the mount, and that mount I am using to start a new container. So even if I am stopping, deleting, starting a new one, still I am having my old data with me. I am having all my configurations, right? Now let's log in. CLS. Now let me log into my Docker repository. See here, localhost now :8085, because this 8085 is the port for my Docker repository, and this 8085 port which is inside the container has been forwarded to again 8085 port of my Docker host. Okay, if I had mentioned, just to clear a doubt, if I had mentioned this command like this, 8086, so it means what? The internal port 8085 of my repository, I want to forward it to 8086 of my Docker host. So if this is the command you have started your container with, then in the Docker login you should be specifying Docker login localhost :8086. Please understand. Okay, but we have forwarded that repository port to our 8085 port. So Docker login localhost :8085. Now the authentication has already been done. I had already authenticated my Docker to this repository just few minutes back, so it has not asked me the credentials again. Otherwise it would have asked me the username and password, and then I had to provide it. But now the username and password it has already taken up from my last attempt of logging in. But now the login is succeeded. Now we are not getting any 404 error which we were getting when we were trying to access it using 8084 port. 8084 is the port of your manager, and 8085 port is of our Docker registry. Please remember this. Now we are logging in. We are logged in, I mean. Now I'll show you how can we push our Docker image to this repository of ours. This repository. Okay, so Docker image ls, let me Docker image prune, let me just delete all the unused Docker images if there are any. Yes, so all the unused ones have been deleted. Docker image ls. Okay, now let's say I want this particular image, I want to push. Now we have not yet created our own user defined Docker images, which we are soon going to do once we will start understanding Docker file, and that time we are going to create our own Docker images, and those Docker images then we would be pushing to our Docker registry. But for now, let's say this image I want to push to my Docker repository, this one. So how can we do that? Let's understand this now. Now if you see, there are two sections to a image name. The first is repository and second is tag. So this tag usually denotes the version of the Docker image, the way we version our software, right? 1.0, 2.0. So similarly you can version your Docker images with the help of tag. And this repository, so which is the repository you want to push the Docker image to, or you want to download or pull the Docker image from. So this is the name of the repository. So this Jenkins/Jenkins is basically the name of the repository, a Docker repository where the Jenkins image exist. Okay, now what is our repository? Our repository is, how can we access our repository? Using localhost /8085, right? So what I need to do is I need to tag this image. This is called tagging. Tagging means not only this section, this denotes the version, but what I need to do is I need to docker tag. I need to change the repository name as well as tag for my image. So I need to say docker tag, then the name of the repository :tag. So name of the repository :tag. I need to change the tag of this image to localhost :8085, because this is the repository. This is where our repository exists. Please understand, this is how we are referring to our repository. How are we accessing our repository? This Docker repository using localhost :8085. That's what we did, right? When we did Docker login. So this is how we refer to our repository, localhost :8085. Then I can say /Jenkins :1.0. So the meaning is that I want to change the name of my this Docker repository, Docker image. This is my Docker image. So I want to change the repository to this localhost :8085 / I'm providing some name. So this is the name of a Docker image, which consists of repository / some name :tag. Tag is the tag which denotes the version of my image. Okay, so I am changing the tag. So I am changing the tag. So I have changed the tag. Now let me push the image. Docker image ls. Let me first check. So this is the image. So see, the name of the repository has been changed to this localhost :8085 / Jenkins, and the tag. Now what I can do is I can push this image, docker push. Now this image would be pushed to our repository. See, it is pushing the image now. Correct. See, the image is pushed. Now let's go and check the image here. See, this is the image. This is in our Docker repository, DevOps patch. And this is the tag 1.0. Now I can pull the image from here. The way we can pull the image from a Docker hub, you can pull the image from your repository. There is no change in the command. Now what we need to understand is there are few points here. Let's understand those. Please understand the naming of the image. Let me just do Docker image ls. This portion is very important. This denotes which Docker repository you wish to push your image to, this particular section. this entire thing is the repository, right? So here to this we have got this DevOps patch, we have got a Jenkins, right? Jenkins image and a tag. So this 1.0 is this section, 1.0 tag, and this entire thing is the repository. So you need to retag whenever you will create your image. Now when we will understand how to create our Docker image, so that Docker image should be tagged or should have the name which should contain your repository or your repository. This is where our repository is, like localhost :8085. This is our DevOps batch repository is. Inside that I want to create a Jenkins, and the tag of that image should be 1.0. This is the understanding. So you need to retag the image. When you push, so how does it know that which Docker repository to push to? So the Docker understands which Docker repository to push to depending upon this section of the image. So this tells Docker to access the repository hosted on 8085/Jenkins. So this is what it creates here, and then the tag of the image, which tag that image should have. This is how this Docker push works. And pull also similarly. Let me remove the Docker image rm. Let me remove this image. Docker image prune, and let me pull the image. So pulling is the same command. I mean Docker pull, and I have got my image pulled. See, this is the image. I have pulled it from my repository. So there are two important points, please understand. One, if you want to set up your own Docker repository in Nexus, you have to configure connector port. This one here. This is what you need to configure. Another thing, if your Nexus repository is HTTP Nexus repository and not HTTPS, then we have to mention this in secure registries. This we had done that day, if you remember. Now our repository is 8085, so I am just mentioning 8085. If you don't define this, then you won't be able to connect to a Docker repository which is HTTP repository. HTTPS is more secure form of communication, right? So if you try to connect to a less secure repository, which is HTTP repository from Docker, then Docker will not allow you to do so if you do not have this. So the setting itself says that in secure registries, insecure meaning the HTTP communication is not secure as compared to HTTPS. It's a HTTPS communication is a encrypted communication and HTTP is not. So it's kind of an unsecure communication. So if you wish to connect to such unsecure repositories from your Docker client, then you have to configure your repository you wish to connect to in this insecure registries section. So this is point one. This is first thing which we did that day. Another thing we did is we configured the connector port, and third thing which we did is we executed the command to run the Docker, this Nexus container we executed using this. So here we have two port publishing. The first port is for our Nexus manager and second one is for our repository. Then we tagged our image we wish to push to with this localhost :8085. This is our repository /Jenkins. You can give any name in place of Jenkins, but this is important so that it will understand where to push to, which repository to push to. So this is how we refer to our repository localhost :8085, and then we mentioned some tag. So we first retagged the image we wish to push, and then we executed the push command, docker push. Okay, let me just copy this and put it in our document. This is what we did. This is important. Creating a HTTP connector port and publishing that port was the key, and then we executed Docker login first, and once the login is successful we push the image. See here, Docker login. This is the Docker login. Docker login localhost :8085 and not 8084. 8084 is the port for our Nexus manager. 8085 is the port for our repository. So we logged in inside the Docker repository, and then we push the image which we have tagged using the name of our repository.